So, who here likes nu metal? Are you saying boo or new metal? I was saying nu metal. Yes, the avenue mainstream metal took in the mid-1990s and early 2000s is not remembered fondly, and wasn't regarded too highly even at the time, but I think a lot of the bad rap it gets is undeserved, except maybe the songs that actually featured bad rap. Still, the stigma against nu metal serves no purpose, never did, and I have no shame in admitting that it was how I first got into metal. There's even one nu metal band that I don't hesitate to call one of my top 5 favorites, and that band is Nothingface. Never one of the big names on the scene, largely because they were cursed and had numerous misfortunes befall them over the course of their career, they still had a dedicated cult following and some major artistic triumphs. What I didn't appreciate about them in their heyday is now the thing that keeps me coming back to them again and again. Their socially and politically conscious lyrics that have only become more relevant in the time since they were written. Nothingface began with 2 roommates in Damascus, Maryland, bassist Bill Gall and drummer Chris Houck. In 1993, Chris placed an ad looking for potential bandmates in Rocks magazine, which was distributed in nearby Baltimore, where guitarist Tom Maxwell was living. Tom had been performing since the 80s, but was between gigs, so he responded with a sample of his guitar work on cassette, and it was immediately clear that he had what they were looking for. So they added a vocalist named Dave Gabbard and chose the name Nothingface, after the seminal Voivod album. They began recording by the end of the year, and this is what they sounded like. I said this was a nu metal band, right? Well, for their first year, they played grunge, as was the style at the time. The band's interest quickly shifted towards heavier music though, which alienated their singer, so after playing a few shows and recording some demo tapes with Dave Gabbard, he quit the band. Luckily, Chris and Bill had been hosting the recordings of a band called Ingredient 17 at their house. Tom heard these recordings and wanted to give their singer a shot at the music Nothingface was working on. This singer was Matt Holt, who was nearly a decade younger than the rest of the band, but after one test session with him, they knew they had struck gold again. Matt was now the frontman of Nothingface, making them the band I know and love. They got right to work making their first full album, a self-titled debut independently released in 1995. This album was then found by a Washington, D.C. based record label who got them to re-record it with new tracks for a nationwide release titled Pacifier in 1997. This would be their first big introduction to the world, and it was a Korn album. Despite having formed a like-minded group of talented musicians, Nothingface was still chasing trends. Nirvana exploded in 1992, so in 93 they played grunge, and Korn's genre-defining self-titled album was released in 1994, so 1995 saw them following the leader. This is a bit unfair. There is some great stuff on Pacifier, but it wouldn't be until their next album that they really found themselves. By 1998, they pushed themselves to the very fringe of what counts as nu metal. Their next release was titled An Audio Guide to Everyday Atrocity, and it was meant to hold up a mirror to the ills of society. The 90s were a period some called the end of history. The Cold War was over, the entire world had adopted liberalism, Democrats held the White House and presumably always would, and no noteworthy event would ever occur again as the arrow of time curved slowly towards progress. It was a profoundly ignorant stance that required a position of incredible privilege to buy into, and even a few who held that privilege saw through it. Matt Holt was one such individual. but the depths of neoliberal rot were mostly obfuscated to the 20-year-old lyricist, so his big indictment of the evils of America was actually kinda shallow. The opening song, Gold Tooth, was inspired by Iceberg Slim's memoir Pimp, and yeah, the exploitation and abuse of sex workers is one of the pillars upholding the evils of capitalism, but I just said more about that than the song does. The next song, Grinning, is a disturbing, slur-laden first-person account of a hate crime, but after that, he loses the thread almost completely. There's 2 songs expressing anger about people who use organized religion as a shield against criticism, and the rest isn't about much of anything at all. Not their best insights into the world around them, but a fine album that got them signed to TVT Records, the label that had helped propel Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine to multi-platinum status and would have Nothingface's next release readily available across the globe. Slipknot's debut came out in the summer of '99 and showed that nu metal audiences were ready to move away from the genre's roots of rap and funk influences towards angry, heavy, violent music. And lucky for Nothingface, they were already writing an album called Violence. You might not be surprised to hear, I'm pretty fond of this one. Violence has it all. Relentless riffs, immaculate production quality, complex polyrhythms, I don't even know what those are, but they sound awesome. Perhaps conceding that it's not what metal audiences wanted, the lyrics take a step back from social commentary. There's a song about recreational marijuana usage, for which Matt has always been an outspoken advocate, but he's white, so that's not a crime. One other track is about the glorification of violence in American culture, but he had yet to tie that to any specific horrors. Rather than trying to highlight society's ills, the band dubbed Violence the soundtrack for the end of the world, and with a release date of October 10th, 2000, it had arrived just in time. Less than a month later, the US election went to the candidate who lost the popular vote, which had only ever happened 3 times before, bringing history out of retirement and setting the scene for decades of widespread misery. And as the facade of America crumbled before them, each member of the band suffered personal tragedies. Just before recording Violence, Chris Hauck learned his blood pressure was dangerously high, playing the drums was potentially life-threatening, and the medication he was prescribed proved ineffective. He opted to risk recording his part for the album, while Matt's old bandmate from Ingredient 17, Tommy Sickles, learned his parts to take his place on the tour. Chris finished recording without incident, then parted ways with the band over his health concerns. In the 2 years following the album's release, Bill Gall went through a divorce, Tom Maxwell's mother passed away, and Matt Holt's house burned down. Any one of these events could have, understandably, broken up the band, but they decided to keep going and got back to writing their next album once the dust had settled. The flood of changes that had affected the band are reflected in every aspect of their 2003 album, Skeletons. The lyrics are clear, focused, and fearless. The soft songs are much softer, and the heavy songs are much heavier. They prepare you to expect a wide variety of musical approaches immediately, with a straightforward metal opening track followed by an all-clean vocals rock song. Then a song that is actually titled Murder is Masturbation. This is the single most nu metal song they ever released, expressing mindless, unbridled fury and the exhaustion that comes with such intense emotional outbursts. Somewhere out there is a CDR with this song burned onto it, right between Slipknot's Surfacing and Deftones' 7 Words. And I for one salute that priceless relic. And what filled Matt Holt with such a murderous rage? Why, that's the subject of our next song.
Police search for the gang members suspected in the shooting. In local news, the Washington, D.C.-based band Nothingface has been reported missing after finishing the last show of their Skeletons tour. Their whereabouts are unknown.
Ether was the album's only single and one of the few music videos they ever made. In the video, each member of the band gets black-bagged, interrogated, and brutally killed for spreading their message of dissent against the government. But the song isn't about their opinions, or even what the government is up to. Rather, it is largely told from the perspective of the American people who are seeing war for the first time in their lives and embracing it.
I know everyone, I've been everywhere, I know everything, because I'm everybody.
The Iraq War began on March 20th, 2003, despite the reason for war being an obvious fabrication and there being no stated goal besides freedom. There was pushback in the form of the largest protest in history up to that point, but the only result of that resistance was ruined careers and renamed side dishes. It seemed that the general American populace was in favor of the invasion, but not for its imperialist intentions. Deeply rooted in the privileged classes of America is the belief that violence against those who are different from you inherently makes you safer, even when you know there is no correlation between the victims of that violence and yourself. We are seeing it today with people who continue to support the police in the face of overwhelming evidence that they only do harm, and we saw it in 2003 from supporters of the Iraq War. The fear of terrorism had a devastating effect on many, and knowing that people far away were dying placated these concerned citizens. Hence the song's title, Ether.
We won't show restraint because we like the violence. We are security, wrapped in our brutality.
It wasn't just the American response to 9/11 that radicalized Nothingface, though, and their next target was even more revered than the military-industrial complex: capitalism. Their previous album, Violence, that they had poured their hearts into and lost a founding member in recording, had flopped, selling only 87,000 copies to date. Its single, Bleeder, was the highest charting song of their career, but no video was ever made and no other singles from that album were released, completely wasting the opportunity to capitalize on that success. Matt placed the blame for this failure squarely on their label, TVT Records, and made the phrase "fuck TVT" a slogan he would shout on stage, even leading the crowd and the rest of the band in chanting it at a show in August of 2003. I Wish I Was a Communist is much less, specific in its anger. One imagines TVT Records might not want to release a song about how much they suck. This instead is a more general criticism of the music industry, which is a better way to make their point. Artistic pursuits cannot thrive under capitalism. The band's first experience with the music industry had made this abundantly clear, and Matt was ready to tear the whole system down. Perhaps our next song is a conscious effort by the band to make music that could not, under any circumstance, ever be commodified.
Hate is nothing new. Murderers watching every step. Ignorance, oblivious to all the evidence. Repent for all that were the innocent. Forget, so we all can rest. Hate's the end of time. We all will see it in our lifetime. We all will die violently.
That's actually how the song In Avernus begins. Rather than using his harsh or clean vocals, Matt employs stilted talk singing, hitting seemingly arbitrary notes that occasionally follow the guitar. He continues this alien cadence even as the chorus explodes behind him, making for the strangest song the band ever released. That gigantic chorus really grows on you the more you hear it though, and there's a surprisingly beautiful bridge that, you guessed it, has some scathing indictments of America. I gotta say, that is still a blisteringly hot take. After that detour into weirdness, the album returns to its pattern of switching between quiet and loud songs, with Patricide being their least heavy song and Here Come the Butchers being one of their heaviest. The latter is their takedown of the Catholic Church for its numerous abuse scandals, and before the album was released, the band announced that it would be the title track, only later settling on the name Skeletons. Doesn't take long for things to get weird again with the notorious I Am Him.
It's like a needle, a kind of evil.
This is just a really sparse, bland composition, completely unlike the lush and engaging music they usually play. But at least Matt's singing this time, until he isn't. For nearly a minute, he just lists people and things that are bad about America.
I'm the judge and inquisitor. I am the corporate-funded senator. I am the stink, the shit, the hate. I am American.
It's just odd to hear this mess coming from these guys when you know what they're capable of. But there exists a recording of a live performance of I Am Him where everything about it falls into place as a sort of grim perversion of a religious experience. It's legitimately incredible. If this has to be the longest song on an already bloated album for that performance to exist, I'd say it's worth it. The album gets back on track after that, capping off with 4 tracks of solid rock and metal. Among them is a major set piece of the album, the penultimate track, Incarnadine. It covers the same topic as murderous masturbation, intense anger, and the debilitating effects of a prolonged heightened emotional state, but it's handled much more artfully, weaving between a full band assault and solo acoustic guitar to put you in the exact headspace that Matt is singing about. It's incredibly sincere and honest, and if you've spent any time plugged into leftist politics yourself, you'll likely find it relatable as well. Then there's one last track of fun, playful anger to close things out.
I thought this was a good time to tell you that I'm just fine. Sometimes I get a little angry. Right now I'm high. Fuck you for the great disease. Locked up in reality. Everything's alright for me, cause there's no fucking God, only anarchy.
Ultimately, Skeletons is a very eclectic and uneven album. Nearly half the songs aren't even trying to be metal, and the back and forth between these and the brutally heavy songs kills any sense of flow it might have had, with 2 baffling curveballs thrown in to guarantee a disorienting experience. But something can be flawed and still be a masterpiece, and I think that's the case here. We're not done talking about Skeletons either, as there are 4 songs written for the album that didn't make the final release. 2 of them, In the Wake of and Everything I Hate, are perfectly good album tracks that just don't fit on the album. Down in Flames, however, actually was included as the 14th track on special editions of Skeletons that were never released in the US. The song did appear on the soundtrack for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, giving it very limited availability in America, but even the officially released version is of terrible audio quality. Doesn't detract from the song's grimy low end, though, nor its subject matter. Down in Flames is a song about the inevitable defeat of capitalism through the direct action of anarchists. Seriously, check it out.
200 years and you can't get it right. When you wonder why we want to start a fight, you should see it coming, but soon you'll see it falling. When it's over, it'll happen in a flash. We're the corporate crowd makes us sick. We're taking control and we're saving the sadists. Just like the demo, you build our lives. That's why it's disappearing right before your eyes. We are the second chance.
And then there's the final B-side from Skeletons. I mentioned that Here Come the Butchers was announced as the title track for the album, but even before that, they announced that the title would be The Principles of Gangsterism, and a song by that title was written, recorded, and leaked on the internet. Unfortunately, it's only a very rough demo. Most of the lyrics are indecipherable, but you can make out enough to tell that it's directed at George W. Bush, and the chorus delivers the message they had for him.
Let's talk about country. Let's talk about day. Let's talk
Unlike most other anti-Bush songs, this one demonstrates that it knows exactly why he was a problem and what to do about it, and it's not vote him out. This is an explicit call for revolution, and it somehow went from being the title of the album to never even being finished. Now, I don't think the government censored the band Nothingface for their potential to incite a revolt, but maybe they got a talking to from the label and had to drop their two most extreme songs. Whether or not this was the case, tensions with the label were mounting, and disagreements within the band about the direction they were heading have been cited as the reason for the unfocused nature of Skeletons. By the end of 2003, Bill Gall had left the band, and on February 10th, 2004, they announced the official end of Nothingface. It looked like Skeletons would be the giant middle finger they left the world with. But this was not the case. Late the following year, Nothingface returned, releasing 2 new songs as free downloads and scheduling a reunion tour. I'm not going to go through these 2 songs and give each lyric the credit it deserves, we'd be here all day. Suffice to say, they picked up right where they left off and now had no label to answer to. All you need to know is that Let It Burn opens with Matt self-identifying as an anarchist, and Walking on Bodies calls the Iraq War a genocide. Bill Gall did not return for this incarnation of the band, so Jerry Montano, bassist for The Deadlights and Danzig, fills his role on these tracks. Seems like quite a get for the band, and musically, he's a great fit. But a band the size of Nothingface couldn't provide the kind of luxuries a high-profile artist like Jerry had come to expect. On their reunion tour, he personally wrote and enforced a list of ridiculously strict rules for the other bands to follow, and made up more on the fly if they managed to keep up, causing Crossbreed to drop off the tour after the 3rd date. At least one show later in the tour was cancelled the day of due to inadequate backstage accommodations, but they continued to write and record with Jerry after all was said and done. In 2006, Tom and Jerry, Maxwell and Montano, joined the supergroup Hell Yeah with members of Mudvayne and the drummer from Pantera. Work on Nothingface's album was delayed to take advantage of a brief gap in Mudvayne's touring schedule, so Hell Yeah's self-titled debut saw release before any new Nothingface material. At the release party for the Hell Yeah album, a drunken Jerry allegedly punched Tom in the face. And after he was ejected from the club, Jerry shouted, "I am going to go get a gun, come back and shoot everyone." Among the people he was threatening with gun violence was Vinnie Paul, the brother of Dimebag Darrell. This incident was taken very seriously, and no one involved has worked with Jerry Montano since. Nothingface was now short a member, and updates on their next album slowed to a trickle, until May 2008. When they announced that they had reunited with Bill Gall and Chris Hauck, fully restoring their core lineup. The following year, they began posting frequent studio updates on YouTube, as well as a short, possibly incomplete song named The End. Choosing this title may well have been Freudian. According to Tom, the band recorded a full album worth of demos, sent them off to Matt to add vocals, and waited. And waited. And nothing happened. By August 2009, Tom was sick of waiting and made a statement declaring the end of Nothingface due to Matt's failure to deliver. It's no secret that they had been drifting apart since the events surrounding the release of Violence, and that divide was most pronounced between Tom, the career-minded professional, and Matt, the brash young stoner. Nothingface dumped an instrumental demo and the completed song 1000 Lies, then moved on to different projects. Matt, however, had remained completely silent through the breakup and didn't pursue any further musical endeavors. For years, I heard from locals that he was simply working at a paintball place in Maryland and seemed happy doing so, but eventually even those reports dried up. The next time I heard his name was when the devastating news broke. On April 15th, 2017, fans learned that Matt Holt had passed away. He had been suffering from an unspecified degenerative illness, which only his closest friends and family had known about. He was 39 years old. 1 month later, at a live show for Tommy Sickles' current band, Knives Out, Tom Maxwell and Bill Gall joined Tommy on stage for a performance of For All the Sin off of Violence, one of Matt's favorite songs to play, with Todd Smith from Dog Fashion Disco on vocals. This tribute may be the last time any Nothingface song will ever be performed live. Since I've gotten radicalized myself, many of my favorite metal bands have been huge disappointments. Metal inherently rejects conformity and the demands of society with its abrasive sound, so seeing metal bands fail to stand up for what matters, and in many cases fall in line with fascism and white supremacy, makes their every note ring hollow. It means the world to me to see that my favorite band from the early aughts not only holds up musically, but was more than a decade ahead of me in fighting the good fight. I'm sure a lot of people are going to scoff at the idea of anarchist nu metal, but its value should not be underestimated. It's not going to replace reading Marx anytime soon, nor should it. Chris Hauck has said that Matt was an avid reader of political literature, and his progressive stances are likely a result of those studies. But anarchy doesn't have to be all dense theory and Haymarket massacres. It can be fun, anthemic, and victorious. And sometimes the only literature you need is this. Nothingface was way ahead of the curve, and hopefully someday, their music and Matt's lyrics will garner the appreciation they never quite got in his lifetime.
With a brand new cross in the kid, we're empty as hell, and we don't give a shit. Just like a target, we gone worldwide. We'll never stop the culprit of this on fire.
Hey, thanks for watching, and sorry to end another video with the untimely death of the band's lead singer. I am not going to make a habit of that for my own sake. Expect things to be at least a little more upbeat next time, and expect there to be a next time thanks to my patrons, which I now have. There they are, on screen right now. If you'd like to join them, feel free to go over to Patreon yourself. All patrons will be able to see what the subject of my next review will be right now. Feel free to check that out if interested, and your support of any kind would be greatly appreciated, be it patronage, likes, comments, spreading the word. Anything you deem this labor of love to be worth, it means a lot to me.